All right. Just going live a little early, so we have time to get our questions in as usual. Get your questions in, guys. We have about 7 minutes before we start. Please type in your questions now so that we don't have lag time later. And just a reminder, try to keep it to questions and not comments, because comments are hard for us to read through. The more comments that are just kind of like commenting on things but not an actual question makes it hard to kind of go through and sift through all the comments on the video to kind of get to the actual question. So try to keep the questions when you're typing. That way it's easier for us to kind of answer as fast as possible. No questions, guys. Come on. I only have a few in the Gmail account. It's not going to be full for the whole hour. We're going to have like a half an hour class today. Did anybody catch the SpaceX launch yesterday or our live show? I know obviously not a lot of you caught the live show, but you might have watched it on YouTube later. Ooh, that's the big one right now. Controversy over communion. Popo. Right off the bat, Elizabeth. Okay, well, we'll get to that one first. Try to get me crucified? I'm not scared. I don't care. We should speak the truth and not be afraid, right? Yeah, the Crew Dragon just docked with the International Space Station about an hour ago. That was kind of cool. I was trying to watch a little bit of it after I finished liturgy. Well, that's a good question too, Anna. Wonderful. Keep them coming, guys and girls. So far, just girls, ladies. I'm just posting our live link so people know on Facebook. Hmm. 4 minutes, guys. Because it's Sunday, it's hard for the priest to come on, but I wish we had some other brother priest jump on with us on some of these. I know it's a tough time for them because they're just finishing up liturgy, and Sunday is difficult to kind of just jump online. They might not be able to, but we finish a little earlier. We're usually done around 11:30, depending on the liturgy. But yeah. 2 minutes, everyone. Tina should be joining us. She's just going to jump on probably a few minutes late, so we're going to have to start without her. Yeah. Any more questions? Oh, hi, Dino. Huh. I have no idea. Dino, I have no idea, unfortunately. One minute to go. Okay. Hi, everyone. It's 12 o'clock, so we're going to get going. So, and then other questions that come in, we'll get to them as they come in. So welcome for those of you who are joining us now and all those who will join during our talk. It is the Sunday. Good morning, Angie. It is the Sunday of the First Ecumenical Council, the 318 fathers of the First Ecumenical Council. So it's a big day. Ecumenical means universal, and we have 7 ecumenical councils in the Orthodox tradition, and they were always convened when there was a serious enough problem that it affected the whole church. Because you had like local councils or local synods, as they're called, and you had even like individual synods and individual kind of like dioceses and things like that when there were local problems. But when there was such a big problem that it affected pretty much the whole Christian world, you had to have an ecumenical council to deal with it. And so today we commemorate the 318 fathers that convened in Nicaea under Emperor Constantine to deal with Arianism, which was a great heresy within the church. It was the belief that Christ was a creation of God, was not equal to the Father. So it attacked his divinity, and that's a problem. So yeah, it's a lot of heresies tend to attack the divinity of Christ, and so in the ancient world, and so this was such a big problem that they had to come together because Arius, who was a proto-presbyter in the church, had taught his teaching, and it was so popular amongst the people that it spread everywhere. Hierarchs believed it, bishops believed it, priests believed it. There was a lot of people who were believing in it, and it was a serious problem. So, they had to get together and discuss and defend the faith against this. So it's a big day. All right. Let's start off with Elizabeth Hughes here, and her first question. And it's probably going to be the biggest one in the sense that it's the most controversial and, probably going to get me in trouble, but that's okay. In these difficult times, you really can't say anything without getting in trouble, it seems, especially online. So I'm going to do my best to present the Orthodox understanding of it. And I know that people will disagree or people get angry, but that's okay. And I don't want to debate. Please don't send me hate mail. Not because I'm afraid, but there's no point in debating online and things like that. So the question is, can you comment on the controversy over communion? So I'm assuming that the controversy that you're talking about is this, there has been, since the coronavirus kind of hit and since the whole the whole pandemic has been going on, and we've all been in isolation, and we've been in like lockdown for almost 3 months now, at least here in Canada. Now that slowly churches are reopening, more in the States. In Canada, in Vancouver, they've opened to 50 people. I think Alberta's going to open. We haven't reopened here yet. We have no news on when we're going to reopen here. But in the States, that things are reopening. Of course, now the controversy begins, and it's not really. It's only a controversy because we make it a controversy, not because there's anything to actually be said or anything to actually be innovated or created or clarified or defined in the faith, because this has been dealt with over and over in the history of the church. And it's kind of funny how the same arguments and the same kind of like mistakes keep coming up over and over again in the history of the church. So I'm sure most of you have read online, about, this big controversy over whether the Orthodox Church should be using the same spoon or the same chalice, to commune people, and can the spoon convey disease? Is there a difference between Holy Communion itself and the elements or the utensils or the things that we use to convey them? It's a really touchy issue, and it's dividing people. It's dividing priests, it's dividing bishops, and that's a problem. It's dividing different Orthodox jurisdictions, and it's unfortunate. And I already wrote my thoughts. I'll link a reflection that I kind of wrote, I put together of my own thoughts of what I believe is happening. And I posted on Facebook, I think this past week. And I sent it to my bishop, and I sent it to some of the other brother priests, so they know exactly where I stand and what my thoughts are on it. So you're gonna hear a lot of different stuff, and I would say that the problem is that you hear it from clergy too. You hear it from a lot of different types of clergy and different opinions, and everybody has a theological opinion, and everybody quotes fathers, and everybody quotes canons and things like that. So I'm not going to sit there and start quoting different canons and things like that. I'm going to just basically tell you what I believe and what I've been taught since I was a kid, what I've been taught in seminary, and what I've encountered in the church experientially as an Orthodox priest. The Orthodox Church has no issue with science. The Orthodox Church has no issue with biology, with the scientific method, with the understanding of, for example, how diseases are communicated and things like that. The Orthodox Church is not as ignorant as people think, that we think that, nothing can harm us and nothing can touch us. And, if you go into the church, for example, it's like because it's a holy space that nothing can get you hurt. That's simply not true, because historically we see that, in other plagues in the history of the church, people have gotten hurt. People, by congregating together, have died. Whole parishes died. I mentioned this before. Whole parishes passed away during the Spanish flu epidemic in 1917, not from Holy Communion, but just simply by being close together. So we don't negate the understanding that we live within a physical realm, which is a fallen realm, and that we all suffer, and we all die, and we all go through. Pain and suffering. However, Holy Communion is the one exception. And when I say Holy Communion, I mean that the body and blood of Christ is incorrupt. Yes, it maintains its element as bread and wine, but it also is the body and blood of Christ. Just like Christ himself is both man and God, physically as a human being. He's a human being. He was hungry. He slept. He died on the cross. He suffered, right? So he had flesh. He had human aspects which could be hurt, but he was also divine. And as divine, he was able to raise himself from the dead. He was able to make his body incorrupt after his death. He was able to deify, and he was able to, and what we would call theosis as a human being, like we become closer and closer to God. And when saints achieve theosis, they are able to work miracles, and their bodies become incorrupt even after death, and they exude myrrh and things like that. So we believe that the Holy Communion, the bread and the wine, are also mystically the real body and blood of Christ. And as such, the mode by which they operate, the mode of being of the elements, is life-giving. It does not make us sick. It doesn't hurt us, especially for those who approach with deep faith and and longing for the Lord. The big controversy is not there. I think almost everybody that I've seen online, even the ones who are kind of big proponents of changing the way we give communion, do not dispute that the body and blood is the body and blood. The bread and wine is the body and blood. But they are, they're disputing whether the chalice or the spoon, the utensils, the things that we use to convey, whether they are able to give us disease. It is my contention that they cannot. And I know that some people will disagree with me and get me into trouble. But it is my contention that they cannot. Why? Because when I give Holy Communion, there's a number of reasons why. And there's a number of things that we've been teaching for thousands of years to the people, and we deeply believe, and then suddenly now we've all forgotten them. So when I dip the spoon into the body and blood of Christ and I give it to you, it is coated with the divine body and blood of Christ. It cannot convey disease to you. Sure, other things can convey disease. Yes, somebody touching a pew, a book, whatever. Yes, but not there, not in Holy Communion. And we know this because Orthodox priests do katalisi, which means they finish the Holy Communion in the altar after every divine liturgy, just like I did today, after it's been in everybody's mouth, after they've communed hundreds of people, and we commune and we finish the Holy Communion, and nothing ever happens to us. We never get sick. There's never been one case in the history of the church of anybody becoming sick from Holy Communion. We go to hospitals and we commune people who are deathly ill, who have communicable diseases there. Nothing changes for us. And then we lick the spoon, we down the communion. Nothing ever happens to us. We never get sick. I've been doing this for 12 years. I've never gotten sick. People are going to say, well, Father, that's anecdotal evidence. I said, yes, but it's still evidence, because this is every single Orthodox priest across the world who has ever done this and who's ever done this in the history of the church. We've never been sick because of this. So to me, that teaches me that the Lord protects us, at least when it comes to Holy Communion, right? I'm not talking about everything else. I'm talking about the reception of Holy Communion, and whether we are using a spoon to give communion or whether we are all drinking from the same chalice, like in the ancient way. In the first 1,000 years, people would receive the body in their hands, crisscross like this, and then they would receive from the chalice, just like the priests still do the ancient way inside the altar. Even that is still a communal cup, and nothing ever hurt them. And so I don't believe that any of us are going to get sick. There is no evidence for that. I understand that this is coming head to head with science, and it's causing people to have trepidation and get upset. I think that we have to be very careful in how we say and how we approach this problem. And I think all of us, including clergy, we have to be very, very careful on what opinions we allow ourselves to have, and the opinions that we share on the internet and amongst our parishioners and amongst each other, because a lot of times we're saying things that we think we are being modern, or we think we're being with the times, we're being scientific, but we don't realize that sometimes we teeter-totter on heresy, right? And what do I mean by that? That many of the fathers of the church speak about how Christ, the divine always sanctifies the physical, right? And we teach in our church that when you have holy water, right? We believe in the sanctification of matter. I spoke about it in my sermon on the Ascension, that we believe that physical things get sanctified through the sacraments, right? So when we bless water, it becomes holy water. Holy water doesn't go bad for a very long period of time. It can sit on your shelf for years and it stays fresh. We also believe that holy water, if you take a drop of holy water and you pour it into a glass of water, the whole glass of water becomes sanctified and all becomes holy water. So if we believe that and we teach that, and almost every priest I've ever heard of and every bishop has always taught this for thousands of years, if we teach this, then why does not the communion spoon, when it comes into contact with the holy body and blood of Christ, why is it not sanctified? I don't understand how we can have two different logics there, right? We also, sorry, Tina's coming online here, guys. Connecting here. There you go, Tina. All right.
Hello.
Hello. Okay. I'm just in the middle of answering the very first question in the group.
Perfect.
Which is like the really hard one about the Holy Communion spoon question.
Okay, and I apologize to everybody. Happy Sunday. Nice to see all of you. things don't always go as planned when you're,
Sure.
mom and.
So we have a lot of questions, as you can see in the chat here, and there's also a few. So I guess we're going to fill up the hour just fine. I'm just trying to answer the question that's going to get me in trouble, as I always say. A lot of questions get me in trouble, but the question about the communion spoon is the very first question in the chat, and I'm still on it. 13 minutes in.
Okay.
So I'm just trying to finish. So
all right, go ahead.
Trying to finish my thought. So as I was saying that, we teach the people that when we have sacraments happening, when we have mysteries happening, when we have blessings, divine grace coming down and sanctifying matter, we believe in the sanctification of matter. So we believe that, for example, when you bless holy water, it becomes incorrupt, it doesn't go bad. When you drop holy water, a drop of holy water into a glass of water, the whole glass of water becomes sanctified. Kathayazet, that we say in Greek, right? So we say that to our people. We teach that to our people. People go home and they take a little bit of holy water, they put it in a bigger jug and make more holy water, right? So we teach that and we believe it. It's not superstition. And yet, for some reason, we have trouble believing that the spoon dipping into the body and blood of Christ, not holy water, cannot be sanctified or protect you from disease. So that's one thing. That's an inconsistency there. The other, like, when we start separating and we start saying, well, the body and blood of Christ is one thing, but everything else that it comes into contact with is fallen and can convey disease, then we get into another slippery slope, because then we start basically chipping away at the belief that matter can be sanctified, right? So then, like, what about holy unction? When we bless holy oil to anoint our loved ones who are dying, who are deathly ill, is the oil just oil, or is it holy? Is there something about it that ontologically, mystically changes and becomes something else, right? When it comes into connection with the cotton, why do we burn the cotton if the cotton is just, there is, there's a myriad of examples of where we see, the divine sanctifying the material, right? And again, I mentioned before relics of saints, where we have dead bodies of saints where, according to science and biology, they're dead, right? They should be showing decay, and yet, through the grace of God, there is sanctity coming from them. Saint Demetrius, the myrrh bearer, where his bones exude a sweet-smelling myrrh that heals people. Saint Salvas, the sanctified, who is incorrupt his body. Saint Gerasimos of Kefalonia. Like, there's all these different saints where we see that their bodies are actually are life-bearing. So we have all this phenomenon in the Orthodox Church, and we claim that we have no issue with those things, and yet, because there's so much fear right now with this particular pandemic, we're kind of like stuck now, and we're fixated on the spoon or on the common chalice or whatever it is. We're so fixated on that we are very, very close to dangerously becoming what I would call, and it's not my term, I've seen it, other people use it, we're very dangerously, we're very close to becoming like, sacramental Nestorians, like separating the divine from the sacred, right? And those two can't touch. And that's a very, very dangerous thing. And we have to be very, very careful what we say. So this is my position on it. If you want to know like a further articulation of it, I will post a few articles, and also the article that I wrote on Facebook and I put online. I'll post it in the description, and I'll repost it in the Father Ted group, even though it's already in there, and you guys can go and see more about it. So I'm sorry that I took 16 minutes to talk about that, but it's a huge question. I know it's controversial. I know a lot of people will disagree with me. I know a lot of people will get really, really angry at what I'm saying. They think that they'll think that it's irresponsible for me to say that, to tell people to commune from the same chalice. They will think that it's just, we're anti-scientific, and we're not anti-scientific. It's just there are some things, not a lot of things, but there's some things in life that go beyond. Right? There's the metaphysical, there is the divine, and the divine goes against pretty much anything that we think or understand or believe. And the history of the church bears this out. It's not like this is something we don't know. It's not like this is something that we don't know the answer to. We know the answer to this. It's just in times of danger and plague, and people get scared, and then they start questioning. And when we start questioning, the fear kind of infiltrates the church. The big difference, I want to say one more thing before we move on to the next question, is that a lot of people say, oh, look, in the history of the church evolved and it changed the way it gave Holy Communion. Of course it did. Yes, like we know that in the first millennia, people, as I said, received the body like this in their hands, crisscross, and then the blood from the chalice. Still, it was communal, always communal, right? There were different ways that they did it. but it was always, and even like the spoon, when kind of we transitioned to the spoon, it was just more for practical reasons, because especially when infant baptism became more popular and it was easier to commune infants and things like that, it was a practical change that happened. It wasn't a change because of fear. The church doesn't change because of fear. The church doesn't change because of a disbelief in the power of the body and blood of Christ. And that's another big thing that I would caution today in our modern time, and especially in this particular pandemic, is that we shouldn't rush to change things out of fear. The church should always change things for practical reasons, for pastoral reasons, for reasons that are actually needed. But we have to make sure that when we make those changes, they're not, that the changes don't imply theological beliefs, right? So, when we are afraid that the communion spoon is going to make us sick, it's not so simple to say, well, just because we have weak faith. No, it's not that. It's not necessarily that. It could be that, but like, it's not only that. There is an implication there that the body and blood of Christ, even when it comes into contact with things, cannot sanctify. That's what the implication is. The implication is that the body and blood of Christ is its own little world. Only when that touches my tongue is it good. But if there's any intermediary, it can't sanctify that. And that is limiting the power of God. That's very dangerous to say that, right? And it's so we have to be really, really careful. And it's kind of like with social media, the churches are under this massive social media microscope, and it's almost like we're afraid to witness to the faith because we're afraid that the whole world outside is going to call us crazies. We're going to be the crazies. We're going to be the ones who are politically incorrect. We're going to be the ones that are anti-science. They're going to come and shut down our churches. They're going to come and do all this stuff to us because, we are not with it. We are not with the times. And it's just that any kind of liturgical change, it doesn't matter what it is, any change in the church that happens under these types of circumstances is suspect. You have to be really careful, right? This is not a time to innovate. This is a time to be consistent. This is a time to have faith. This is a time to pray, to be humble, to just do our job, just continue on being the church, being authentic, right? And let everything will pass, right? Like, people are freaking out, right? And we need to learn to have peace within our souls, right? And so that's what I think. As I said, I know a lot of people who disagree, and I know a lot of priests and bishops who disagree, and that's fine. But this is where it's kind of where it is right now.
Well, I think a meaningful discussion is just that. It's meaningful discussion. I think, right. We've talked many times about the danger of blind faith, right? And that it's good to have discussions and good to talk these things out and flesh them out. But, it does get a little bit dangerous over social media. So,
sure.
Caution there.
Sure.
Okay. I had a feeling that would be our first question today, by the way.
Yeah. We'll probably go over a little bit on time today.
Okay, that's okay. So next question is, hi, Father, what is your opinion on how non-Christians will be judged? We talked about this actually in a past session as well.
Sure, I'll try to give a really quick answer to it. It's a great question. Thank you, Anna, for it. So basically, as Orthodox Christians, number one, we are not called to judge anybody. Why? Because we don't know. There's a famous kind of, it's almost become a cliche now, but it's a famous saying where we say we know where God is, but we don't know where God isn't. And that's not a cop-out. That's just basically the acknowledgement as Orthodox Christians that we cannot contain the power of God, nor can we tell God who he's going to save, how he's going to judge people. The Apostle Paul, when he's asked about the Gentiles, he says that when the Gentiles do what the law requires, even though they're not under the law, they're not Jews, right? But when they live their lives that is pleasing to God, they're doing what the law requires of them. For example, when the law says don't kill, don't steal, don't commit adultery, don't do. Well, when the Gentiles when they follow all these laws, even inadvertently or unknowingly, they're following the law. They're a law unto themselves, and God will judge them according to the light that is given to them. Right. So this is what we believe, is because it's scriptural, that for all people who have not had the benefit of being preached to properly the gospel, because you can't say that everyone has been preached properly, right? There's a lot of versions of the gospel out there, and not all of them are very good. And there's a lot of people who give Christianity a bad name. And so I don't blame a lot of people for running away from Christianity if the only Christianity that they see is the stuff that they see on TV sometimes, right? We believe that God will judge people according to the light that they have been given. Okay, and I think the most important thing here is not to wonder or to worry ourselves about how other people will be judged. I think the most important thing is to understand how we will be judged, because we claim to know the truth, we claim to have the fullness of the faith, and yet we don't do it. And because we don't do it, will we not be judged more harshly? Because we have no excuse. We can't claim ignorance. We can't say, oh, I didn't know, Lord. Please have mercy on me. I didn't know. He's going to say, well, you did know. You're part of the Orthodox Church, and you told people that you were Orthodox and that you knew everything. So why didn't you do it? Right? So it's like, it's basically, there's Tina's son, Hari. He's so cute. Hi, Hari. And so I think we have to worry more about ourselves, that we need to be the light of the world. We have the great burden of orthodoxy. We have the great burden of the truth, and we need to teach that, and we need to live it first, right? And I think that's where we have to emphasize. We have to worry more about ourselves than others.
Okay, thank you for that. And we have addressed this in another session. So feel, for everybody really, if you haven't had a chance to catch all of our chats, go back. There's some really great information in there as well. Okay, these two questions, I'm going to combine them from Dino and Angie. So Dino says, when do you think we'll be able to come to church again? And Angie sort of elaborates out a little bit and says, having heard many new restrictions when entering church, can you elaborate, and do you have any clue on when we will be opening? Can we congregate in the parking lot with chairs and speakers, for example?
Yeah, so there's two questions there. So the first one is very simple and unfortunately not very great. No, we have no information about Ontario when we will be opening again. We have no information on guidelines. I know that the Archdiocese is working on guidelines right now. They've been asked by the government of Ontario to give their own kind of ideas of how they want to reopen the churches. So we don't have any guidelines yet. They should be coming soon. We also don't have a timeline on when they're going to open. They're going to let us open. Like I know in Vancouver, they've opened to 50 people. And in Alberta, they might be opening soon, but there are other provinces have not opened yet. So I don't have any information on that. As far as the parking lot thing, a lot of people kind of like heard Doug Ford say, he made that announcement like last week where, people, Christians can go to their parking lots. Well, and people got confused and they started calling the church and say, we can go with our cars to the parking lot. And I'm like, okay, guys, slow down. This doesn't help us as Orthodox Christians. Doug Ford, he's speaking mostly from a Protestant point of view, right? So because Protestants, not all Protestants, right? But let's say for most evangelical Protestants where there is no Holy Communion, right? Where the center of their worship service is the preaching, right? So you don't need to take communion. So yes, for those churches, which maybe they have big churches with big parking lots, people can come and the pastor can stand up on a platform with a microphone and he can preach to them. And it's something a little more personal than doing it at home, right? But for our churches, that doesn't help us because the guidelines didn't allow people to take communion, didn't allow people to come into the church, nor does it allow me to go outside, do a divine liturgy outside in the parking lot, which I could do. I could get a blessing to do it if I had to under extreme circumstances. We do it at camp where we set up liturgies outside. But I can't commune the people. So because I can't commune the people, there's really no point in driving your car to the church, sitting outside and looking at the walls when you could be at home and just watch it on the screen, right? So it doesn't change anything for us as of now, right? And that's why we haven't heard anything from Archdiocese, because there's nothing to do for us right now. There's nothing that has changed that has allowed us to liturgize and serve as we need to as a church.
I think that's a fair answer. And, as always with these chats, we've said that we're going to do Father TED Talks live every Sunday until we're able to go back to church. I know for a fact the questions will come up, but I also know that you will give us any further guidance that you hear.
Of course.
Okay, next question is from Joshua Phillip. He says, why does the liturgy preparation service take place on a table separate from the altar? Since you offer the sacrifice on the altar table, shouldn't it be prepared on the same table?
Well, it's a great question, Joshua. Okay, so think of it this way. The altar is the place where the sacrifice happens. Because of that, no, the preparation should not be happening on the same table. The preparation is a separate thing. You prepare the gifts, and the gifts are offered to God. They're an offering, right? So they're prepared in a separate place, and then they are brought liturgically to the altar for the sacrifice. And because the divine liturgy kind of parallels the life of Christ, if you read, for example, like St. Nicholas Kavasilas, who writes about the divine liturgy in his liturgy, or St. Germanus of Constantinople, who also comments on the divine liturgy. A lot of the Byzantine commentators in the divine liturgy, they say that the way the liturgy is structured, it's kind of like this beautiful reenactment, a movement of the life of Christ, right? So the procession that we do to the altar is like Christ going to be crucified, right? To be sacrificed, right? So he is going from one place, from just like historically from the Praetorium, he carried his cross and he went out to Golgotha where he was crucified, right? And then he was put in the tomb. So he's going from one place to another, and this is what we're doing in the Divine Liturgy. Also, a reminder historically that the prothesis, which is the table of preparation, was historically not inside the altar as it is now. In the Byzantine Empire, it was in a separate building that was attached, connected, right next to the altar, but outside the church. It was called the Scevophylakion. The Scevophylakion was, I guess you could say, it translated means like the storage room, right? The scevi are the liturgical items, and the phylakion is like the place where you store them, right? And it was like there was a storage room. And historically, that's where people would bring their bread and their wine and their offerings to the Scevophylakion, and that's where the preparation of the gifts would happen. And then during the liturgy, the deacons would go to the Scevophylakion, get the bread and the wine, everything, right? And process, come through a side door in the church and actually enter. That's why when we say small entrance or great entrance, right? There were actually real entrances into the church. They were not from the altar back to the altar. So historically, the great entrance would happen from the Scevophylakion, from a side door in the nave, come into the church, and they would bring the gifts to the altar to be sanctified, to be blessed, to be consecrated. And in the same way in the Old Testament too, you brought animals to the temple, right? So you would prepare your animals, you make sure they were clean, you make sure they were unblemished, all this kind of stuff, and you would bring them to the Temple of Solomon, and then the high priest would bring the animals to the altar where the actual oblation, where the actual sacrifice would happen, right? So the preparation happens at a separate place, and the sacrifice happens on the holy altar. I don't know. I hope that answers the question.
Okay, and Joshua has a second question. It says, what is the point of the procession of the mysteries from the table to the altar table? Is it just to embellish the liturgy and make it?
Oh, I just answered that question, didn't I? I just answered in the last one. So Joshua, yeah, it's not for grandeur embellishment. It was I just explained that it was an actual entrance historically. Now, obviously, we don't have a Scevophylakion anymore. This is mostly due to Turkish occupation. When the Ottoman Empire took over the Balkans, churches became smaller, things contracted, right? A lot of our liturgic kind of had to adapt practically to kind of smaller environments. So like the Scevophylakion was absorbed into the altar, and a lot of things had to happen inside the altar. You didn't even have deacons for a long period of time because, we didn't have clergy because they were being killed off by the Muslims, right? So it's like, priest had to do everything himself. He had to do the preparation of the gifts himself. He had to do the procession himself. He had to do all this stuff himself. And so this is why the liturgics kind of changed historically, but historically this is where the procession comes in. It's not just for grandeur. Let's just go around the church for no reason. There's an actual historical reason why it's done that way.
As there usually is. So the last question from Joshua is, why do the priests rarely enter through the central doors? In the liturgies that I have seen, the priest typically enters through one of the side icon doors.
I'm not sure what you mean by that, because the priest usually, almost always, at least in the Divine Liturgy, enters through the royal doors. Maybe you mean the deacons. The deacons are clergy, but they're not the priests. The deacons are the helper to the priest, right? They're the ones who wear the robe, and they have the one orarion, the belt that kind of slings over their shoulder. They're not priests. They are deacons, and the deacons use the deacon doors because they represent, to a certain degree, the angels that are carrying messages between heaven and earth, right? That's why you have angels on the deacon doors and the iconostas. And so they usually move through the deacon doors, but most of the time the priest uses the royal doors. So I'm not sure if maybe you were referring to deacons or whatever, but usually 90% of the time the priest goes through the royal doors.
This next question, you addressed this. I just don't remember the exact episode. It says, why aren't Greek and Russian churches in communion? You mentioned this. Was it last week or the week before? I think the week before. So I don't know if you want to cover it again or.
Why are they? Well, it's a complicated question. We are in communion. We're not in communion. So currently, because of the situation that happened in Ukraine, which we're not going to get into right now, right? There's a canonical problem with the Church of Ukraine. There was multiple jurisdictions fighting with each other. Anyways, ecumenical patriarchate stepped in to kind of resolve it. The Russians didn't like that because the Russian church claims that the Church of Ukraine is supposed to be under their jurisdiction. Anyways, we're not going to get into who's right, who's wrong. That's not the purpose of this video. But because the ecumenical patriarch was appealed to kind of mediate, because they couldn't kind of figure things out on their own, and because the Russian Orthodox Church was not kind of happy with that mediation, with the outcome of it, with giving autocephaly, which basically means giving independence to the Church of Ukraine. Right now, the Moscow Patriarchate has ceased commemorating the Ecumenical Patriarch, which basically means from their end, they have cut off temporarily, I guess you could say, we hope it's temporary, communion with the Ecumenical Patriarchate, not with all Orthodox, but that specific church. They got a beef with each other. And so this is what family members do in the big family, which is the Orthodox Church. They bicker, and a lot of times they fight, and sometimes they don't talk to each other for a while. And then they make up. Because this is what happens in the history of the church. It's not good, and sometimes it's petty, and sometimes it's like just, and a lot of times there's real issues there, which I think there was a real issue here. And sometimes it takes people a long time to come to the realization of when somebody's right, to ask forgiveness and things like that. This is what happens. It's a normal process of families. But from our end, for example, like the Ecumenical Patriarch has not ceased to commemorate Patriarch Kirill. He still commemorates him in the liturgy. He still, commemorates him at the Divine Liturgy in the Holy Eucharist. So from his end, he has not broken communion with him. He still considers him to be his brother and whatever. So it's not so clear cut to say, why are we not in communion? That's not necessarily true. It's just there is a disagreement right now, and this is how the South churches kind of like disagree. And we hope that they will kind of make up soon, and we won't have these kind of politics.
Let's hope.
Yeah.
Okay, this next question says, I grew up in Cyprus but went to university in the States and then moved to Canada after I got married. One thing that always bothered me and found very strange was the choir. Why do the churches have a choir, but more specifically, why don't they chant in the Byzantium style? So
she moved to Canada? So I'm not sure which church. So, okay, so I'm not a big fan of choirs, personally. I don't have one of my churches.
Is that why you haven't asked me to sing on Sunday?
No, I have not asked you. I'm not a big fan of choirs. Not because some choirs are not beautiful, but because I am a big proponent of the Byzantine style. Now, of course, there are different kind of Orthodox traditions, right? So, for example, in Russia has a huge tradition of choirs with Western music and four-part harmonies and things like that. Whereas the Greeks and the Antiochians and the Romanians and a few others have more of like kind of a Byzantine style. There are different styles of singing and chanting in the church. In the Orthodox world, there's different expressions of it, depending on where you come from and which part of the world. So here in North America, some churches have adopted choirs. It's not a heretical thing. It's not a bad thing in the sense that it's not against our faith to have a choir. For God's sakes, no. Like, there's nothing wrong with it. It's personal preference, right? Some people like it, some people don't. Some people come of a tradition that they prefer the Byzantine chant. Some people prefer the choirs. So some of our churches have choirs, and some of our churches don't. But it's not like necessarily it's not a dogmatic issue. It's not an issue of faith. It's an issue of liturgical preference. So like, what kind of music you like. I agree. I prefer chanters or a good Byzantine choir, which is hard to find these days. But I prefer the chanters because I find that it's more conducive to prayer. A choir with many people, I find you lose the language. Too many voices muddle the actual words, so you can't hear clearly what is being chanted. Of course, if everything's in ancient Greek, you won't understand it anyways, but that's a different story. But I prefer the Byzantine chant. But it's something that is, you find it in different churches here in North America, but it's not. It's not a religious dogmatic issue.
Okay, so, and again, you mentioned the fact that it's depending on where you are. Often the questions that we get are because of differences in where you grew up or where you were experiencing the liturgy. So not follow up, but from the same person, it says, growing up in Cyprus, Sunday school or catechico was always on a Saturday.
Correct.
I can understand why this isn't practical in Canada, but why is it done after communion or worse during the whole liturgy? The children miss the whole service this way. Why not after church, for example?
Sure. So I agree with you 100%, number one. The idea of Sunday school is a Protestant creation, right? The Orthodox Church never had Sunday school. Katechitiko, even in Greece in the old days or in Cyprus, again, it's kind of like it's a Western idea of having a catechetical kind of school for kids. Because historically, in the history of the church, we never had that. Historically, it was always that parents should know the faith inside and out, and they are tasked with raising their children properly at home. That was always, like it's a pyramid, right? The parents at the top and the children at the bottom. It's not the other way around. And so this is how it was always assumed that the family unit would be the catechist, right? The family unit. And I'm a big proponent of that because parents need to take ownership of their spirituality and ownership of teaching their spirituality and modeling spirituality to their kids. And so I think it's a big problem. The whole Sunday school phenomenon of, like, dumping our kids in Sunday school, and my kid will get their religion from there and I don't have to do anything at home. That's a problem. It's not working. It's destroyed, family spirituality for many, many years. Doing Sunday school during Divine Liturgy is one of the worst things we could do. And I know a lot of priests who do it and are big proponents of it will crucify me for saying so, but I stand behind it because the numbers stand behind it. So, of course, there are exceptions, right? There are exceptions in the sense that there are parishes where they seem extremely vibrant and huge and lots of kids in the Sunday school and this and that, okay? There are places where they look like exceptions. But what is the problem? The problem is that during Divine Liturgy, liturgy is not for doing school. Liturgy is for liturgy. It's for experiencing the kingdom of God, the kingdom of heaven on earth. It's for our children to be formed and all of us to be formed within the faith, to learn how to just be within liturgy, right? How to pray, how to do our cross, how to do prostrations, how to prepare ourselves, pre-communion prayers, how to take communion, all these kind of things. When you take children out of that environment and you stick them in a classroom, you basically handicap them. You handicap them spiritually and liturgically because they're already in class for a whole week. Monday to Friday, they're in class, right? And then some Greek kids, they're going to Greek school on Saturday. So now you've taken away 6 days. You've stuck them in a classroom. Then Sunday, the only day which is kind of family day and also the day of the Lord, where they should go to church and be able to worship with their families and have a beautiful mystical experience. We stick them in another classroom. No wonder our children hate church and don't want to go to church anymore, or they really don't like it. And this usually is because parents want babysitting. Parents don't enjoy liturgy when their kids are screaming and running around. They don't want to do that, or they feel embarrassed because they feel that they're destroying the prayer of the person next to them, and so they would prefer their kids to go somewhere else. That is definitely not the approach of how we model proper behavior, or also how we teach the faith. And I'm not saying it's easy. I've said this many, many times before, and I posted a few videos last week in the description from last week's video about raising children in the church, so you can go back and look at those if you want. But it's very, very difficult, and it's supposed to be difficult. So in my church, we do Sunday school after communion. So it's better than doing it during liturgy. So the kids go to church with their parents. They sit with their parents. It's organic, right? They're part of the community. They worship as one community. After communion, the kids do leave. The only thing that they're missing at the end is the dismissal. Okay, it's not 100% ideal, but it is kind of a happy medium because, yes, families do have other things to do. They do need to go. They have other programs, things like that. You are trying to accommodate to a certain degree, but so you try to make it. So our kids go off after communion. They go for about 40 minutes. They go to their classroom. They do some activities. They learn. They're reinforced of what they experienced in the Divine Liturgy, and then they meet up with their parents during the coffee hour afterwards. So it works out well for everybody. That's much better than doing it during the Divine Liturgy. During the Divine Liturgy is definitely a horrible thing. There's a really good book. Tina, write it down for me. There's a really good book that I will link that I recommend to everybody called, I think it's called Foundations for Religious Education, I think, by John Boojamra, who used to be a professor at St. Vladimir Seminary. He passed away now. Excellent, excellent book. And he talks about all these fundamentals of Christian education and how we are basically destroying our children's spiritual education by running Sunday schools during Sunday and during liturgy, and how we should be doing it. So, and he goes through the whole historical, reasons why, and also the psychological reasons why. And for the churches that have these massive Sunday schools and they have these massive kids and things like that, I would say one thing, and this is it's not a criticism, because I understand that there's a need. And when you see a lot of kids in church, it makes you feel good, and it also it gives you a false sense of security and of success, a false sense of success. Why? So, because I've served in many different churches that have had massive Sunday schools and very successful, well-run, well-educated Sunday school teachers, right? They're doing phenomenal work. So this is not to belittle the work of the Sunday school teachers or the parish, whatever. But what happens is that most of these parishes, what do? The kids come in, they have a whole section of the pews blocked off for the children, right? Like a VIP kids section, right? They separate the kids from their parents. They stick them in this kind of like kids pen, right? Some kids enjoy it. A lot of kids don't because they feel objectified, but they won't say it because everyone's like looking at them. Oh, look at the cute kids. They're all together. The reason why they put them there is for practical reasons, because it's easier to move them out, right? At some point at the beginning of the liturgy. And also it looks really nice. The optics of it, when you have tons of kids filling up like 20 pews, that looks amazing to the congregation. It's like, oh, look, we have a future, right? And so the optics are great. And so churches do it because they say, oh, this is great, right? And then a lot of times there'll be like a kid's sermon, a youth sermon. And the priest will go down and they'll have a personal connection with the kids and they'll talk to them. And the kids really, really love that. And there's a nice connection with the priest. That's nice. It's not a horrible thing. The problem is again, it's this kind of like sectioning off a whole part of your community, right? Instead of trying to integrate everybody into one family, right? We are sectioning it off, right? Like do a youth sermon. Why don't I do an elderly sermon? Why don't I do a middle-aged sermon, right? And so I don't do youth sermons. I do speak to the youth and I do speak to the Sunday school once a month. They do come down after liturgy and sit back in the church alone with me and we talk and we do a Q&A, but I don't do it during liturgy. There's one sermon in my church and the parents listen to it. And if the kids want to know, they can ask their parents and the parents can break it down for them properly. This is the way of things. This is the way parents need to take spiritual responsibility for their kids, right? And to be able to break down what the message of the day is for their children to understand, right? It's not for the priest to basically do everything for the kids, bypassing the parents. I think that's dangerous and so it causes a problem. So I would say to those communities that have massive Sunday schools, it's not the numbers. I would be interested to see a longitudinal study over, let's say, 15, 20 years, where you track those children who went through that Sunday school program and then look at the numbers of how many of them stay in church, right? How many of them stay in church when they get into their 16, 17, 18, 19, 20s, and how many of them continue on and are very, very involved, and how many of them disengage. I would venture to guess, I don't have numbers, so I can't give you hard numbers, right? But I would anecdotally venture to guess that the numbers are not great. Right? That all those kids that went through Sunday school, they may have had a good time in Sunday school, but as soon as they graduate around 15, 16 years old, they don't step foot in church for a very long time because they have no way of being. They don't know how to sit still and listen to the Lord. They don't know how to do their cross. They don't know how to act in the divine liturgy because they've never been in the divine liturgy. They've been in a classroom, then there's a little bell, they come by, they pick them up, they take them in to take communion, disjointed and disconnected from the divine liturgy, and then they go back to their classroom again. That's not church. That's not worship, right? And so this is why it can't work in the long run. It cannot be a viable solution to form Christians in the liturgy.
Yeah, and just as an aside, I have said many times over the course of these chats that I am not in any way an expert. I'm a student as I sit here and I just facilitate the questions. But I will say that as an educator and as a mom, this format works phenomenally well. My 5-year-old, yes, gets very tired sometimes, or almost gets very tired sometimes in the liturgy, but he sits there for a good portion, and it's because he's been there since the beginning and he's following along. And one other thing I'd like to add that you've referenced before, as Videta Joanna, your wife, has talked about, has posted as well, some of the articles from some of the other moms, Orthodox moms and Vedetas, that talk about how important it is to be in the liturgy with your kids, especially your little kids, and to do things that are sort of counterintuitive, like sitting very close up to the front because there's less distractions there. Yep. It's more interactive. They can see you, they can see the priest. And so there's a lot of value to this. I'm really glad that question came up because we've never addressed it here, and it's just so important.
Sure.
Okay, here's a question, relatively straightforward. It says, maybe not straightforward, can we say the Holy Eucharist is God? Well,
yeah, of course. That's the whole premise, right? The premise is that we believe that the bread and wine are mystically the body and blood of Christ, not symbolically, not it represents something else, that Christ is actually there. So I said that at the very beginning of the video, that, and people say, well, how does that work? Well, we don't get into transubstantiation, all these other kind of formulas the Roman Catholics have and other people have, kind of trying to like break down, like what part is Jesus and what part is bread, you know, like we don't get into that. We understand that there's a mystical reality there that is happening, and it is something that we cannot fathom, but we believe that Christ is actually there. People are going to say, well, how can you believe? It tastes like wine, tastes like bread to me, right? Of course it does, right? But I always tell people, I give the example not only of the two natures of Christ, right? So, when the apostles were with Christ, they saw a person in front of him. They didn't see a guy glowing with an aura. They saw a person. But we believe that Christ was also God at the same time. So that's a miracle, okay? But I'll take it. I'll bring it home a little bit, right? We believe, most of us believe that we have a soul, right? And so we say, do you have a soul? I say, yeah, I have a soul. It's like, okay, well, how do you know? Like, do you see your soul? Like, where is it? Where can I pinpoint it? Where does your soul reside? Is it in your ear? Is it in your nose? Is it in your heart? Is it somewhere else that I like? How do I perceive it, right? How do I separate your soul, that spiritual element of you, away from the physical? We can't, right? But we somehow have no problem though believing that. We believe that we're psychosomatic beings, that I can be both a physical being and I'm a spiritual being at the same time. And sometimes I can perceive that in the other human being when I get to know them and I love them, and I can perceive their soul, who they really are on the inside. But we have no problem believing that. So how come we have a problem believing that bread and wine can also be the body and blood, right? At the exact same time, right? So this is, of course we believe it's God. Yeah.
Okay. Here's a question. Does each bishop or archbishop have the authority to change certain liturgical things, such as how communion is distributed?
So yes. Okay. So yes and no, in the sense, why do I say yes and no? Bishops, of course, are tasked with defending the faith. So it's their job. They're like kind of like the buck stops on them, right? Like they are the overseer. That's what episkopos means, right? To oversee, episkopevo. So they are there to oversee and to make sure that the faith is being taught properly, especially amongst the priests, right? And everybody under them. So yes, they have the authority to change things. Why do I say yes and no, though? Because all authority in the church, even the patriarch, it's at the top, right? All authority is given by Christ. It is Christ's authority that we exercise. It is given to us. Just like my priesthood, it's not my priesthood, it's the priesthood of Christ. There's Christ right there in the icon, the high priest right there. And it is Christ who is the high priest. And I am simply working on his behalf in the sense that it is Christ's priesthood. It's put upon me so I can function. It can be taken away from me. It's not mine. I don't own it, right? And so the authority that is given to us by the church only rests on us as long as we are in line with the teaching of the church, okay? It's not a power. It's not you're bitten by the radioactive spider and you're Spider-Man. You have the power. It's yours. We don't wield power. We exercise the authority that is Christ. So if a bishop, as long as a bishop is in line with the Orthodox tradition, the Orthodox dogma, is teaching the right thing according to the last 2,000 years, is not contradicting, is not preaching heresy, right? Then of course the bishop has the right to make any pastoral changes that they need to make and liturgical changes for the good of the church, right? And that's happened many, many times. Like there's lots of liturgical changes, the way we pray, that we change because there's different needs and wants and needs, and the church, the body of the church has needs and it needs to grow, right? So as long as we're doing the changes for the right reasons, right? Now, but if a bishop, for example, makes a change that is for the detriment of the church, that has a negative effect, or that is for a heretical reason, that is deviating from the faith, well then no, the bishop cannot do that, and then other bishops, of course, will be able to kind of call him out. This is what happened with Arianism, which is what we're commemorating today, the First Ecumenical Council, is because Arius was a proto-presbyter within the faith, within the church, right? So he had the authority, but when he started teaching heresy, which was against the dogma of the church, he departed from his priesthood. He misused his priesthood, right? And then what did the Ecumenical Council do? The Ecumenical Council called him to the council and they asked for an apologia. Apologia is an apology, we say today, not an apology like I'm sorry, but rather an apologia to give account, right, of what he taught. So he said, okay, well, this is what I teach. And the council said, well, what you're teaching is heretical. It's a departure from the actual faith of the apostles. It's not what we've believed for the last 300 years. You're teaching something new. This is a heresy, and we ask that you stop because you're doing damage. And he said, no, I'm not taking the correction. I'm right, and all you 318 fathers from all over the known world, you are all wrong, and I'm right. And they said, okay, well, no one's forcing you, but if you're going to be like that, then you're excommunicated because we can't allow the cancer to grow within the church, right? Yeah, if you're not going to repent or change, then you got to stop, right? So they basically they deposed him, they excommunicated him, so they took the priesthood away from him, because he was misusing it. And this is the same thing with bishops as well. Like, nobody is immune from heresy.
So the same person, I think, asked further down, including how communion is being distributed. If I may, I think it's Stavro. What I'm gathering from the question is, can they tell you how to distribute communion? I think we're back to our original question.
Yes,
here.
and
Can they tell you exactly how to do it, even if some people in the faith believe that that's heretical?
well, they can. Again, so the big problem today is and the big problem always is that, again, obedience, right? So we are obedient as priests. I serve at the behest of the bishop, right? I am an extension of the bishop in the parish. I'm the bishop's hands, I guess you could say, in the parish, right? I don't do anything without the blessing of my bishop. So you're right. Like, so what happens? So the priest should always be obedient to the bishop, except in times of heresy. So everything else the bishop asks me to do, the bishop tells me to sweep the floor, right? The bishop tells me, I don't want you using Byzantine music. I want you to use Western music. I know you don't like it, but this is what you're going to do because your parish needs it. I may grit my teeth. I don't like it. I'm like, I don't like it, right? But I'm going to do it. Why? Because he's my bishop. And because, again, he's the boss, right? Like, there has to be a hierarchy. There has to be organization, right? Like, the brain tells the hand or the foot what to do. If the hand or the foot stops listening to the signals coming from the brain, the body becomes dysfunctional, right? Or the body becomes handicapped, and then you don't move properly, right? And this is the way the church is as well. And so, yes, we have to listen to whatever the bishop tells us, except in times of heresy. If the bishop ever tells us, or if a priest ever tells you as a layperson to do something that is heretical, that is clearly against the faith, then you have the right, and you also have the obligation to not follow, because then if you know, like, according to your conscience, you know, like, this is wrong, right? So go back to Arius, right? If Arius teaches his people, he says, well, Jesus is not God. And well, the people, if they know that what he's teaching is wrong, it's like, wait a minute. We believe Jesus is God. We believe Jesus is the Word of God, the second person of the Holy Trinity. And you're saying he's not. I have the right to call out Arius and say, with all due respect, Father, what you're saying is heresy. What you're saying is wrong. It's against the faith. It is clearly against who Christ is, right? And I cannot agree with you, right? So this is, but it's a difficult thing, especially when you have times of controversy with people where there's much debate. And so I understand where you're going with this question. I won't say any more, but I think my position is very clear on it.
Yeah, I think it's pretty clear as well. This looks like a very straightforward question, and it relates to communion, so I'll segue into that. If I am a Russian Orthodox, can I receive Holy Communion in a Greek church?
Of course. As I said, from the Greek churches, and especially from the Ecumenical Patriarchate, we have not stopped commemorating the Moscow Patriarchate. We still commemorate them. It's the Moscow Patriarchate that has stopped commemorating Ecumenical Patriarch Bartholomew, but we have not stopped commemorating, and so we will commune anybody from the Russian Orthodox Church. We will serve with them. They're our brothers and sisters. We are not. We're still in communion. On our end, we still have an open door communion with the Russian Orthodox Church.
Okay, so the same person has a question about, it says, is it a dogma to believe?
Sorry, you're cutting out. One sec, Tina, you're cutting out. Your audio's out. Okay, her audio's out.
Can you hear me now?
Oh, we just lost her. Look at that. We just lost her. So hopefully she'll come back. I'm going to finish. Oh, there we go. Let's answer. And hopefully we'll get her back. There we go.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah, ask the question again, because you cut out right in the middle of the question.
No problem. So it says, is it a dogma to believe that Theotokos was, let me just get back to the question here, I was going from memory, was sinless, or can I believe she sinned?
Okay, so we don't, okay, so just a clarification. We don't believe that she is sinless, okay? We believe that she is the holiest out of all of us, right? So we believe that in her life, she committed no sin except the original sin that she's, the ancestral sin that she's born with, right? So she's still a human being. Like, she's not, only Christ is sinless. Only Christ is sinless, right? The Theotokos is not sinless, but she is the closest to it of any human being ever got. We could say that, okay? So we don't deify her. She's not perfect. She is the best of us, Okay, she's the great example. She's not the great exception. She's the great example. So, it is dogma for us to believe that, but we don't believe that she's sinless. That's not something we do, and then that's one of the things that differs from the Roman Catholics, I would say, right? Because we don't believe that she was like that she had no no sin whatsoever, or that she was somehow immaculately conceived or something like that. We don't have any of that kind of dogma. So.
Okay, so on the topic of the Theotokos, it says, why do many Greek churches have huge Theotokos paintings above the altars? Shouldn't it be paintings of God, since the altar is about God?
That's a great question. Okay, so, well, first of all, you can't paint God the Father. We spoke about this last week. It's forbidden to paint God the Father because nobody has ever seen the Father, right? God is spirit. You can only paint Christ, who we've seen, the Virgin Mary, things that we've seen, right? Like that have been incarnate, that are manifest in the world. You can't depict things that we've never seen, that are invisible, right? So God the Father, you can't depict. The reason why the Virgin Mary is usually in the apse, which is a semi-dome behind the altar. There's usually an icon of her with her arms open wide with Jesus in her bosom. It's called the platitera, the all-embracing mother. Basically, it's because symbolically the Virgin Mary represents the church. The church in Greek is a feminine word, ekklesia. It's a feminine. So the church is a feminine, right? And Christ, and this all kind of lines up with kind of like the hymnology of the church and the beautiful theology that we have through the hymns, right? So Christ is known as the bridegroom, right? Male, right? He's the bridegroom, and he goes to meet his bride, who is the church. The church is female, right? So it is this beautiful union between the bridegroom, and the bride, who is the church, right? So the Virgin Mary represents the church, the mother, who embraces us in all, right? And Christ is the head of the church. He's the father, right? So you have this kind of like beautiful, gender imagery that exists within the church. Mother, father, family, right? Children. And so this is why a lot of times when you see the Virgin Mary behind the altar, it is placed there, that icon, as the church with her arms open, embracing her children as they walk in. That's why it's placed there, not, so there's different kind of iconographic motifs that exist within Orthodox churches. We spoke about this a couple of sessions ago about iconography and church planning and how like icons are placed in different places. I don't want to go through all that again, but you can go back to the videos and check those out as well.
Okay, so we have one more live question and then a few in email. We're at 1 o'clock.
Let's keep going. Let's keep going. Let's get them all done.
So let's go with the live question then, because Chris is here. So Chris asks, the holy cloth that covers the holy chalice, is it a blessing to touch it? The same cloth we use to put under our chin when we receive, since Holy Communion, a strip upon it. Sorry.
Well, those two different things actually, right? So you're talking about the red cloth that we use practically to protect Holy Communion from falling on the ground. That's a little different than, I'm assuming that's the cloth you're talking about. It's called the machtro in Greek. And basically, that's just like it's a practical cloth that we use. Why? Because we don't want Holy Communion to fall on the ground, because it's the holiest thing in the universe. And so we have this kind of cloth to protect kind of like the bridge between the chalice and the person's mouth so that it doesn't fall on the ground, right? That's why we have it. So it's a practical thing. Of course, sometimes the blood, the communion falls on it. And this is why when that happens, we're very careful with that cloth, and we wash it in a special sink in the back, which is a ground well. We've spoken about this before. I did it on my live video last week when I did the whole preparation rites in the morning, where I show where we wash our hands, and we have the choneftiri, which is the ground well that goes into the foundations of the church. It doesn't go into the sewers. And we wash those cloths there so that anything holy goes down into the earth naturally and it doesn't go into the, right? And we wash those very, very carefully. But that's like a practical thing. It's not something we send out to venerate. It's more like something practically that we use to be able to convey communion properly and safely and appropriately and with the proper honor and veneration to the body and blood of Christ.
Okay. Thank you for that. This is a follow-up to the question before about believing in God. It says
the Holy Trinity.
Yeah, Holy Trinity icons. Are they incorrect?
Yeah. So they are, as I said, they are incorrect. I mentioned this in a previous video as well. I think it was 1 or 2 weeks ago we talked about this, how the Seventh Ecumenical Council actually forbids painting God as a father, like as an old man, because we have the God the Father. I spoke about this, so I don't want to go through it again because we have a lot of questions to go through. I would go back and listen. And they do exist in a lot of churches, and they shouldn't. It's true. What can I tell you? We're breaking our own rules, and we shouldn't. But and this is something. Is it the biggest? Is the biggest sin? No, it's not. Like, is it like the biggest threat to orthodoxy? No, it's not. It's an annoyance, but it's not proper, right? It's not.
You mean the God that they have in The Simpsons is not the right one?
With the 3 fingers, yeah. Oakley dokley.
Okay, here's a question that talks about what you spoke about in the space launch. It says, with SpaceX launching people to space and opening up the world to bigger and better space exploration, where does our faith stand with that? Good, bad, or neutral?
Ooh, I love this.
I know you do.
You know, well, listen, Tags Games, whoever it is, you should go. I just did a live stream yesterday on Father TED Talks. We watched the launch together, and I did one on Wednesday when they were supposed to launch, but the weather stopped it. So I have a part 1 and part 2, a special on the SpaceX launch. So I think everybody, if you watch that, you'll know where my position is. I love space exploration. I'm a big Star Trek guy. So, and I think it's wonderful, and I think it's not a bad thing at all. I think human curiosity and human ingenuity is a wonderful thing, as long as it drives us to do good things and not to like exploit and hurt our neighbors and obviously do unchristian-like things, right? But exploration is a beautiful thing because it gives us it helps us appreciate the awe of creation, right? And I'll say something kind of. I was thinking about this today because the Crew Dragon just docked with the International Space Station at 10:16 actually in the morning. I know that, Tina. You're like,
know the exact time.
Of course, I know the exact time. I watched it in between liturgy and this live feed. It's a lot of people don't know this. This is a true story. When Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin landed on the moon, right, in 1969, it's a very interesting story, but it's a sad story too. It's a commentary on our society back then in '69, when you would think people were more conservative back then, more Judeo-Christian society, right? So Buzz Aldrin is a Catholic, right, and he brought Catholic communion with him, right, on the LEM, the lunar module, right? And he wanted to partake of Holy Communion when he landed on the moon, right? So very interesting. So he had a host with him, right? And basically those famous words, the famous NASA transmission when Neil Armstrong steps off the LEM and he says, one small step for man, one huge step for mankind, right? And everyone was listening back in 1969, and they're listening to the radio feed coming back from the moon, and they were like glued to their TV screens. Back then it was black and white, and everybody kind of like knows how it all went down. Well, there was also Buzz Aldrin, who was inside the lunar module, and when he partook of Holy Communion, and he said, take, eat, this is my body. He said the words, right? And that got radioed back to NASA, to Houston, but they never broadcasted that. They purposefully did not broadcast it to the world. They wanted to leave religion out of it. They did not want to taint the lunar landing with any type of Christian or religion whatsoever. They wanted to keep it completely secular, right? And he did that, and he thought people were listening. He thought the whole world. When he got back home, he realized that nobody ever heard him because that part of the feed was cut out, right? The NASA control center, they heard it, right? And there's articles about this. You can Google it, but nobody did it. And so it's kind of interesting that the first people on the moon, well, one of them had enough faith to thank God for what he was seeing and an appreciation for the creation, right? And this is a scientist, is an astronaut, right? And so what does that tell you? And I've always wondered what the perspective would be of an astronaut seeing his home from space for the first time. Like the grandeur of creation. I speak a lot about this in yesterday and Wednesday. So go back and watch those videos, and you'll know.
I can't even imagine. That would just be almost overwhelming.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So that's all of our live questions. We've got 4 more in email.
Let's do it.
Okay, so I may need to leave you because I've got a very fussy baby.
Okay.
By the way, that was from Luigi, who says he's a huge space guy. So thank you for that question, Luigi, and for letting Father Ted
On this channel, just watch the 2 previous videos. You can watch it and you can see everything we talked about.
Thanks for letting Father Ted get his geek on.
Yeah.
Okay, so the first of the 4, and then unfortunately I will probably have to bow out. In scriptures and during the divine liturgy, we hear that with the fear of God, let us stand with the fear and dread several times, and they can be construed and as a negative or threatening idea. We know our God is loving and forgiving. Can you explain these seemingly opposite messages?
Yes, I got this a couple of days ago, so I had time to prepare for it to give you a little bit of a reference. So it's not contradictory. So the word that you're referring to is phovo in Greek, right? Phovo is translated as fear. But in the ancient world, phovo can mean fear, but can also mean like respect, right? Like it's the same word, right? So, it can be either the same word can denote fear, like, fear, I'm scared, fear, or it can be fear as in deep respect, like I have a deep respect for a king, right? I fear the king, or I fear my parents, but not like in a negative way, right? In a positive way, like an awe-inspiring fear, right? So phovo in Greek is in the ancient Greek can mean both, and so when you see the term phovo theou, the fear of God, like for example, it says exactly. So it's like the fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom, right? Approach with the fear of God, faith and love, right? It's not fear like be scared. It's more like this great and awesome mystery that is before you, and how can you not be, humbled by it, right? And just general awe, shock, you know what I mean? The awesomeness of it, right? So that's the type of fear that we're talking about, not fear like you're going to get punished. Having said that, and that should be enough. That's like the basic understanding of the fear of God, right? That we should have a healthy fear of God, right? Not like a fear like he's going to punish us, but a fear that, it's like that God is the creator, like I'm not the boss, he's the boss. And I should want to listen to him, right? Because he knows better, right? And I should have a healthy fear. If I don't have a healthy fear, a healthy respect for my Lord, then I'm gonna do whatever I want. My ego is gonna go through the roof, which it already does anyways, right? And I won't care about anything. There needs to be a healthy respect, a healthy fear of those in authority over us, but not fear again, like they're gonna hurt us. That's not the point, or punishment. But as a second thing is that also I was reading an article about this the other day, and in Greek, and it was saying that it's kind of interesting that the word in ancient Greek phovo can either denote deep respect or deep fear, like as in you're afraid of retaliation. And it is not God who, it's not the actions of God that change and that kind of instill these 2 types of fear. It is our spiritual condition, right, that changes our perception. So what does he say? The author said that when you are a righteous person, when you have a good relationship with God, right, phovo is respect, right? When you're a bad person, phovo is fear, right? When you do bad things, you will assume God is going to punish you. And why is that? Because your conscience is pricking you, right? It's the conscience is telling you, oh my God, I've done really, really bad things. What will my Father think of me, right? I deserve punishment for what I've done, right? So it's our spiritual state that changes our perception of the word fear, not God, right? Which I thought was a really interesting insight.
Very interesting. Okay, I'm going to give you 2 questions combined, and then I'm going to let you answer the last question on your own because I've got a crying baby.
I got
so it says,
answer.
I was wondering if it was possible to let us know the receipt for the Prosforo. Thank you for that video. And also, where can we purchase the stamp?
Okay. 1 sec. Oh, because there's a
and in the meantime, while you're doing that, I'm so sorry, everybody. I gotta go, but have a great week. There's still one question to go, so don't leave.
There's a few more. There's a few more. Yeah, there's a few more.
Keep going.
Thanks, Tina. Bye. Okay, let's switch over here, just so I can take a look at it. There's a few more questions actually in the Gmail. I'm just gonna pull them up here. The Prosforo. So Prosforo, you can. I'll try to link. I'll try to find. I have a few good links online where you can buy good Prosforo stamps. because finding good ones are hard. Sometimes like a good wooden one that has a deep cut, so it'll give you a nice good stamp. And also as far as recipes, there's lots of different recipes, but I'll try to post some good recipes. A good recipe. I have one on my notes, on my Facebook notes. I'll find it, and then I'm gonna cut and paste it into the description below, like I always do with all the other stuff that we talked about. And I'll also paste it into the for the TED Talks group as well, so you can go there and get the method of baking, the recipe, and I'll also put a link to where to buy Prosforo. Provide link to where to buy Prosforo seal. Provide Prosforo recipe. Okay, so I'll put that as well, and thank you for that. Whoa, we got a few more questions, guys, so bear with me. Okay, the fear of God. I would like to know more about despondency and what the church fathers said about it. What references should I be looking at? Okay, so because I don't have time to get into the whole thing. Despondency, for those of you who don't know, is a type of spiritual illness. It's not depression, although a lot of people connect it to depression or think that it's the same thing, or think that the fathers are speaking about depression. Depression, like especially clinical depression, like as a kind of a mental health thing, is not despondency, which in Greek is akidia, or rathymia, but it's more akidia. Depression is katathlipsy. Katathlipsy is clinical depression, like just like sadness and deep depression. That's a different thing. But despondency is more like a spiritual laxity and a spiritual kind of like inability to move forward. And I'm not going to get into the whole thing right now because it would take like another hour to discuss, but I have a really good resource for you from my friend, Dr. Nicole Rokas, who's an amazing Orthodox theologian. And she wrote, quite literally, the book on despondency. It's this book here. It's called Time and Despondency, right, by Dr. Nicole Rokas. She lives here in Toronto. She's an excellent theologian. She teaches with me at Trinity College at U of T under Orthodox School of Theology at Trinity. And this is Time and Despondency: Regaining the Present in Faith and Life. It's a Ancient Faith Publications bestseller. Very, very good book. Again, I will post it in the description, and I'll put a link for it. Get this book. It's an easy read. It's not like super high theology, although it's very profound. And there's also a really good podcast by Deacon Michael Hyatt on Ancient Faith Radio, who's the CEO of Thomas Nelson Publishers, the biggest Bible publisher in the world. He's an Orthodox deacon, and he has a podcast called At the Intersection of East and West, and he does a whole read-through of this book. He dedicates like a whole series of podcasts reading through this book. So even if you can't read the book, you can listen to that podcast and listen to him kind of read through it and explain it in a live class, which is really, really good. So I'm gonna post those both in the description as well. Time and Despondency book, Deacon Michael Hyatt, Time and Despondency podcast. There's lots of stuff I got to post for you guys today. So I'll leave it there for now, and then you can kind of take a look at it. This is an excellent, excellent book. Talks about how the fathers view despondency, how do we fight despondency, all these kind of things. Really, really good book. Here we go. Another one on there's two more, I think, for email. Here's one. A new commandment I give you. In John 13:34, it says, to love one another as I have loved you, that you also love one another. As we know that Jesus is the embodiment of God on earth, would this mean that as Christians we have been given 11 commandments? Well, that's a great question. So it's I'll answer basically with another quote from the Bible, from Matthew 22:37, where he says, like we have the 10 commandments. We don't just have, in the Old Testament, you don't just have the 10 commandments, right? You have a lot, you have like hundreds of commandments, because the Jews believed that it wasn't just the 10 commandments, but rather all the laws from Leviticus and Deuteronomy. I forget how many there are. Like, it's really, really bad that I don't know the full number, but like they believe that all the laws, like from both Leviticus and Deuteronomy, like hundreds of them, they're all important. You have to follow all of them. So they had tons of commandments, right? And so when a young lawyer comes to Jesus in the New Testament in Matthew, and he says, what do I need to do to inherit eternal life? And, Jesus says, well, what does the law say, right? And he says, he rifles off the different commandments, right? Honor your father and mother, do not kill, do not steal, do not commit adultery, do not do all these things. And Jesus says, and he said, I have done all these things. He goes, the young man says, what else do I lack, right? And so Jesus says, you shall love the Lord your God with all your heart and all your soul and all your mind. This is the first and great commandment. And the second is like it. You shall love your neighbor as yourself. On these two commandments hang all the law and the prophets. So Jesus it's not about numbers. It's not about, do we have 11 commandments? Do we have 10 commandments? Do we have 30, 100, whatever? Jesus says, he basically reframes the whole question in the New Testament. He says, you love the Lord your God with all your mind, and all your soul, and all your heart, and all your strength, everything you give to the Lord, right? And if you do that, you also got to love your neighbor as yourself, because every human being is made in the image and likeness of God, right? So to love your neighbor is to love God, and to love God is to love your neighbor. You cannot have one without the other. The cross, right, is the vertical, us and God, and us with our fellow human beings. And that's why Jesus says, anybody who says they love God but they hate their neighbor is a liar. And so this is kind of covers all the different kind of individual commandments and guidelines and things like that, right? If you love God, then you're not going to be an idolater. You're not going to have graven images, whatever. If you love your fellow human beings, you're going to honor your father and mother. You're not going to steal. You're not going to covet. You're not going to commit adultery. You're not going to do all these things, right? So it all covers these two great commandments: love the Lord your God and love your neighbor as yourself. So it's not about numbers, but rather it's about the reframing of the question to kind of cover everything, to kind of put things into perspective. A culmination of the whole law and the prophets of the Old Testament can be found in these great two commandments. So you could say that there's really two, right? So love is kind of again, it's along the same lines, right? It's if you love one another as I have loved you, right? So as God loves us, we are called to love. It's along the same lines. It's just said in a different way in the Gospel of John, because John tends to emphasize love a lot more than the other apostles, or the other evangelists, sorry. Okay, let's see here. I have another one, I think. Ooh, oh my goodness. There was one girl, Eleni, and she sent me a ton of stuff right now. What time is it? It's already 1:19. Well, we'll take it to 1:30. We'll take it to 10 more minutes. We might as well round it off at an hour and a half exactly. Here we go. And there's also more here online as well. Wait, there's one online here. I just wrapped up Romans in the King James Version. It seemed really powerful and brutally honest, which is fine. It is what it is. I'm wondering if that is just my interpretation. Is that the King James Version, or am I reading the Bible from harsh perspective? No, I think that, Paul, just to give a quick answer to Alex there, Paul's epistles are written to different communities for different specific situations. So he's addressing pastoral issues in every community. So sometimes he needs to be harsh, sometimes he needs to be softer. It all depends on which children he's speaking to and what problems they're dealing with, right? So you'll see in his epistles that sometimes he's harsh and sometimes he's soft, sometimes he's pleading with them, sometimes he's doing the smackdown of the law. This is just what a good father does, right? So I don't think it's you. It's just with the Romans, he's dealing with specific things, and it's a very good epistle. I can't go much deeper into that. I don't think it's your perception. Here's this big email, and I'll try to get through it. It's the last one I'm going to answer today. One question is, when talking to people in the United States and in Canada about interreligious services, I've been told it's not a big deal to hold services with other religions. What is your opinion on our priest serving some sort of service of prayer with a Catholic priest, for example, outside of a church? So I'm assuming you're talking about ecumenical prayer meetings. So we can't. There's a difference between attending, for example, an ecumenical gathering where kind of Christians are all kind of praying together, but this kind of generic prayer for Christian unity and things like that. And there's a difference between actually sacramentally sharing, sacraments with each other. So we as Orthodox Christians are not in communion with non-Orthodox Christian denominations, and so we cannot share Holy Communion or do services together. We can't serve a wedding together. We can't serve a baptism together. We can't do any of those things together. And so we are prohibited from doing those things because we are not in communion with each other. Now, as far as us attending, for example, visiting, an ecumenical gathering where, there might be a prayer happening, There's lots of different things that can be said about this, whether it's pastorally good for us to do it. Does it send our people the wrong message? Do the optics look bad? Sometimes they do. Like, does it look like we're kind of like joining hands and singing Kumbaya with everybody and that there are no differences between us? And are we avoiding those differences? Are we trying to be there as an Orthodox witness to certain things? There are a lot of different situations, and that's why I tend not to give a kind of a blanket statement to everything. But I would say that we're just cautious, right? Like I don't participate in any actual service with anybody. I have visited as a visitor, as an observer. I've been at ecumenical gatherings or at other services where I'm an observer. I just watch what they're doing. I'm not actually participating. I'm not, doing prayer with them and things like that. I'm just watching, and I don't think there's anything wrong with that. It all depends on what you're there to do and how you're doing it. And what is the extent of your participation, and do you believe the things that they're saying and things like that? Like, so there's a lot of questions. It's kind of a little bit of a vague question. So that's the best kind of answer that I can give. But I would say that, if you don't know your faith though, I would say stick to your faith, because if you don't know, and then you start going to tons of different churches and different denominations, you can get really, really confused about dogma and about teaching. So have a firm, strong, Orthodox foundation in your faith before you start delving into a lot of different denominations, because then you might get really confused, right? Number 2 here, and the thing is, I once asked my spiritual father if I could attend a civil wedding, which came about because I was once told I shouldn't attend a different religion service, such as Sunday service, wedding, or baptism, and he said it's best not to attend and to only go to the reception. When I mentioned this to a friend, I got told it was extreme and wrong. Any thoughts? I, of course, followed my spiritual father's advice. So, again, I really don't have an opinion on it, in the sense that I don't think it's appropriate for me to comment on your spiritual father's direction of you. That's my answer. Every spiritual father knows his spiritual children, and he knows what they can handle and what they can't handle, and what's good for them and what's not good for them. What might be good for you might be bad for somebody else. Somebody might be able to go to one of these services and not be affected by them, and somebody might not be. So that's why I am not going to comment on this. Or I don't, it's up to your spiritual father. And you did right to observe what he told you, because he knows you better than I do. So I don't think it's fair for me to comment on his spiritual guidance of you. Just like I've said before in our videos, that we should not be, and we shouldn't even be discussing, in my opinion, publicly, what our spiritual fathers tell us in private, and also the guidance, the spiritual guidance. Like, I don't go around telling people what my spiritual father tells me to do. I just do it, and I try to grow spiritually. And beyond that, I think we get into trouble. So you did right. You did right in following what he told you, and I think that's all I'll say about that. Another question: how do you talk to very young children, 5 years old, for example, about the martyrs of our church without scaring them? Talking about tortures they went through brings up questions like, why did the bad guys do that? But more importantly, I can see fear in their eyes, and it makes them anxious. Well, yeah, they're 5 years old, guys. So it's like, not to say that you hide that from them, but we have to choose pastorally, and also just as parents, like, what are the types of things we're going to expose our children to as they grow? Like, we got to remember that the Christian faith is an adult faith. It's a mature faith. It's we come into our fullness of the faith when we become adults. Yes, we say become like children. Christ says that. And that's, of course, the idea of having the innocence of children and having the complete faith in the parents, as we have to have complete faith in our Father who's in heaven. But there are a lot of aspects of the faith that little children are not ready for. So no, I don't go into the nitty-gritty details of martyrdom with my little children, because they're not ready for it with my 5-year-olds or even my 8 years old. As they get older, we can start exposing them to these kind of things. But there are certain things that we teach them, and certain things we don't teach them yet until they're ready. So just like children, you give them baby food first, then you give them steak as they begin to have teeth. And so spiritually speaking, give them the spiritual baby food first, and as they grow pedagogically, you start exposing them to more. So I don't know if we should be talking about the flaying of martyrs, or cutting in half or something like that, or being put on the rack and things like that. I don't think we should be exposing 5-year-olds to that, because they won't understand the concept of it. They just psychologically, they won't understand the value of those kind of stories, whereas an adult can. And the last question here is, when it comes to baptismal names, can it be a name that isn't from a saint, or does it have to be a saint? I've heard priests say it's okay to name any name because there are many unknown saints, so you never know. And I've heard priests say no, to absolutely needs to be a saint's name. Okay. And that's the last one, because the last question here has to do with the spoon again, and we already answered that. So I'm not gonna you go back to the beginning of the video and we can talk about that. So technically, so we have a really beautiful tradition within the church, which is that when we baptize people, we give them a saint's name. And the reason why we do this is because it's all about formation in the Orthodox faith, right? So as we grow, and as we grow in the faith, it's good not only to form ourselves in the liturgical life of the church, but also to learn about the lives of the saints, who are our heroes, who are our examples of how to live a good Christian life. And so it's really nice to have a patron saint, to have a saint that we're named after. We can have a personal connection with that saint, and we can celebrate on their feast day. It becomes our name day, and it's all about the saint and about Christ, who the saint is emulating. And so it's a good way of teaching us how to be, and what's the proper mode of being, and the proper mode of living. And so this is the reason why we have this tradition of giving saints names. Having said that, there's a difference between having a really beautiful and an encouraged tradition, like I encourage people to do this, and there's a difference between that and it being dogma, and we have to do it. There is no canon in the church that says you have to give a Christian name to a child or an adult who's being baptized into the Orthodox faith. There is no way that we can impose that on people. And the reason why is because in the history of the church, if you look at the lives of the saints, at some point there had to be a first. Like, so for example, when you look at St. George the Victorious, right? Well, St. George was the first St. George, right? Now we have lots of other St. Georges from other time periods, but St. George was the first. So before him, they were Christians. He was baptized George, first time, right? And St. Nectarios, he was the first, named Nectarios. There was no St. Nectarios before him, and he's a fairly recent saint. He was in the 1900s. So it's there are lots of saints who had to be the first, which means that Christians always did baptize new names into the church calendar and into the life of the church, right? So I always tell people, yes, it's a wonderful tradition, and we should try to keep it. But if you're adamant about giving your child a non-Christian name, like a name of that doesn't exist in the Synaxarion yet, that we don't have a saint for, we can do that too. Why? Because you don't know if that person will become a saint one day, and we won't have a new saint, right? So it's like, I remember once I baptized a kid named Hunter, which is like about the most American name you could ever, or Canadian name, I guess you could say, that you could ever have. And there is no Saint Hunter, but the parents really wanted to, the parents were both converts to the faith, and they really wanted to name the child after the husband's father, and we baptized the kid Hunter. Now that child might grow up and become a saint, and then we might have a Saint Hunter, which sounds hilarious, but it shouldn't be, because there's lots of names that we have that seem strange to our ears because we're not culturally conditioned to hear them, and yet they are saints. And so it's not the name, but it's the person, and that's why I allow. It's not like I'm sitting there and promoting it. I promote the Orthodox tradition because I think that it's important for kids to have a patron saint. It's part of their spiritual formation. But if for some reason parents do not want to give that name and they want to keep another name, then that's totally fine as well. And the question is, if the people do not have a name day, yes. So those people, they usually celebrate on All Saints Day, because All Saints, which is coming up next week, is also in 2 weeks, is the day where we commemorate all saints that we don't know about, especially, right? The saints that we know about, but also the saints that we acknowledge we have not recognized that have existed, and we didn't know about them, but God knows, right? So most people who don't have a specific saint name, they like to celebrate on All Saints Day. But yeah, and they can learn about all the saints if they want. It's okay. So that's it, guys. It's 1:30. We've been on for a while, but a lot of great questions. I'm sorry if I offended anybody by any of my answers. I try to do the best I can, as I always do, and I pray to God that what I've told you is correct. God bless all of you, and we will see you guys again next week on 12. Next week is Sunday. It's Pentecost, great feast of Pentecost. And so we will be on at 1 p.m., not 12 p.m., an hour later. Why? Because on Pentecost, the service is a little bit longer. We also start a little bit earlier because we also have the Vespers of the Holy Spirit, because Monday is Monday of the Holy Spirit. And we do the Vespers, according to in the Greek tradition, attached to the end of the Divine Liturgy. So right after the Divine Liturgy ends on Sunday, we also have the Vespers of the Holy Spirit, which has the beautiful kneeling prayers where the whole church kneels and we pray these beautiful long prayers of asking God to send down his Holy Spirit upon us, just like the apostles had the Holy Spirit come down upon them at Pentecost, and also how the Holy Spirit comes down upon us at our chrismation, at our baptism day. So we were going to be a little bit later, and so I need time to set up and to finish the liturgy and to finish the Vespers, and then also to be able to set up for our live feed. So we will be at 1 p.m. next Sunday, not 12. I'll also put up a poster for it again, and hopefully we'll see you all then. So again, God bless you. Have a beautiful Sunday. Hopefully the weather is nice outside wherever you are, and we'll see you next week. Take care.